to go up to men and women, I think on university campuses normally, and proposition them. And when the women proposition male strangers, they almost always say yes, and if they say no, it's because they have a girlfriend or whatever. Whereas when the men proposition the women, they always say no, because women, like, their filter is impregnable. And there's a reason for that. It's because you don't want some like to be knocked up by some bozo. This is one of the reasons why prostitution is as traumatic as it is. I mean, there are all of the physical risks involved in prostitution, like rates of murder are insanely high. You know, it's if we were to compare it to another profession, it would be by far the most dangerous profession ever. Like, rates of PTSD are much higher than in the military, for instance. But one of the reasons why it's so profoundly distressing is that women have this really, really strong instinct to, like, vet their sexual partners and to only have sex with men who seem like good prospects. And women also have a very low sexual disgust threshold, which means that they get the ick very readily with a man that they don't fancy. And what women in prostitution are basically required to do is to override that and to suppress those instincts. If you talk to women who've experienced it, they often talk about, like, working really hard to dissociate from their physical feelings. It's that retching on the bathroom floor thing. I mean, actually, Rachel Moran, who's a prostitution survivor and has written this amazing book called Paid For, which is a memoir of her experiences, she talks about the fact that not vomiting is one of the most important skills a prostitute can have, because your physical urge to run away and to cry and to vomit is that strong that you have to, like, fight it down. And I think that if, you know, in a much less extreme circumstances, obviously, but when women are trying to, like, to play the masculine role and to imitate male sexuality and to enjoy sex in the way that they think they're supposed to, they are basically obliged to suppress their instincts, which isn't at all psychologically healthy.
Has normalizing sex work like OnlyFans been a benefit for women?
I mean, there clearly are some women on OnlyFans who make a lot of money from it. So there are some winners. I mean, they are very unusual. Most women on OnlyFans probably make a loss in terms of the amount of time they have to spend, because the Pareto distribution on OnlyFans is wild. And most of the women who do really well on it are already celebrities and already quite wealthy. So this idea that you can just be, like, as long as you're sufficiently pretty, you log on and you're making a fortune is not true. And I'm sure has been deliberately whipped up, that idea, by OnlyFans, because they're the only people actually really profiting at the end of the day. I mean, I think the OnlyFans is not like street prostitution or brothel prostitution. Like, it's clearly not the same. It's pretty gross, and you will have men asking you to do things that really turn your stomach. But it's clearly not, like, physically dangerous. I think that the main risk of OnlyFans is your ability to have a long-term relationship afterwards, because you end up putting your images out in the world and you can't get them back, because that's the nature of the internet. And often OnlyFans creators get their images stolen, and so they'll be shared and they don't even get any money from it. And the risk is, in the future, that even though men don't always admit it, the sexual double standard is still actually really alive and well. So sexual double standard being when men are kind of permitted to be a bit promiscuous, and that's okay socially, but women tend to be punished for promiscuity.
I think that OnlyFans goes beyond promiscuity. You know, the double standard didn't account. It's not men wanking on camera and then trying to find a wife and them saying, my friends shared something in a WhatsApp chat earlier on, and that kind of looks a little bit like you. What about normalizing like love sex workers? Like, sex workers you should be completely fine with your partner doing OnlyFans or perhaps even escorting.
I mean, crazy. What kind of? Yeah. I mean, either. I think if a man is really comfortable with that, that's like a red flag to me. Honestly, like, again, it's an example of men suppressing their instincts, because the instinct towards jealousy is so strong, and again has such an obvious evolutionary origin to it, because if you're putting loads of resources into raising children that you've had with this woman, you want to know they're yours. Like that's mate guarding is what the biologists call it, and it's so common that I think it's considered to be a human universal. And yeah, like there are loads of sort of unwelcome phenomena that come from that. You know, jealousy is often the motive behind domestic violence, for instance. It's like, you know, you mentioned the naturalistic fallacy, like the fact that it's natural doesn't mean it's necessarily good, but it does also mean that trying to completely override it is probably not going to work. Like you have to find a way of accommodating your instincts. You can't just try and suppress them and try and like rewrite the human blueprint.
But that's where I think it's not men that are encouraging women to do OnlyFans. I don't see men on the internet saying that you should go and that you, girl, should ditch your job and go and do it. The only people online saying sex work is real work seems to be women. Yes, men are the ones that are paying for their images once they're in the game. But I think that's because once women cross that threshold and become a sex worker or whatever, they're almost kind of not subhuman, but they're in a different category, right? And it's like, oh, well, they're doing it. I didn't get them into it, so I'm just going to continue to fund them. But if you were to say to most men, I think, would you advise that pretty girl to get into OnlyFans so that you can see her nudes? Most of them would say, probably not. Probably not. But almost every healthy man would say no, right? They'd say, no, I'll try and go out with her, or maybe she should just go and enjoy her life or do whatever. But once they're in the game, that's what's going to happen. But you have this very bizarre sort of cartel, I don't know, it's like not self-oppression, but like self-capitalization from women, of women, encouraging other women to go and do the game, despite the fact that the chances of you making money on OnlyFans is minusculely low when it comes to actually making the tens of thousands of dollars a day that the biggest creators make. And yeah, I mean, even if you were able to have an unbelievably secure OnlyFans that was never able to leak your photos online, you have two choices for the remainder of your life when you get into talking to a new partner. You can either tell them the truth, and regardless of how comfortable that guy is with his sexuality, finding out that his missus, forget body count, even if you've only slept with one other person, but that was something that you did, you can't like left brain your way out of thinking that is, oh God, well, if she did that in the past, does this mean that she's maybe she's a risk for promiscuity in the future? Like the cuck radar is so hyper attuned for men, which is why we get more jealous. Or the other one is to lie to him.
Cuck radar is interesting phrase.
Good coinage game.
Because I have used I don't write it in the book, but I've like talked about it on Twitter, nonce radar, which I think that women have really strongly. I mean, I think men do as well, but I think women in particular have a really strong, like, I think it's partly a sexual disgust thing. It's that feeling of like, this guy is creepy. And I think it's like female intuition, right? And I think it's probably partly coming from wanting to protect yourself. It's also partly wanting to protect your children. You've got that, like, this guy's bad news.
Yeah, if I'm going to sleep with him, what's he going to do to the kids, perhaps down the line? I got to tell you about this meme that I saw. So Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, a guy who has incredibly conservative views about this stuff, but aligns completely with what we're saying here. He posted a meme the other day, and it had a girl from OnlyFans in like a bikini or lingerie or whatever, sort of dancing away on one side, and it had Michael Scott from The Office on the other, sort of looking strangely. And the text said, "We call it female empowerment, and they will dance naked for the price of a cheeseburger."
Yeah. I mean, this question you raise about why women encouraging each other to do it, you're right. I mean, one exception I would give is I do have a friend who went on a date with a guy who said, "You're so hot, you should be on OnlyFans." And she did not go on a date with him again because it was just so obviously, I know.
Failing strategy, I think.
Yeah, because the way that she interpreted it, and I think correctly, was that he was clearly not regarding her as like wife material. Right. And this is, I think, an error that women do make sometimes where they don't have a good understanding of male sexuality and they don't. It's really interesting. I don't know if you read David Buss's book, Bad Men.
I absolutely love it. Yeah, I brought him on for that.
Fantastic book. Yeah. And he talks about the fact that women tend to assess like short-term partners and long-term partners based on the same uh, qualities. They want the same things in all the men they have sex with. Men don't do that. They have a much lower standard for their short-term partners than they do for long-term partners. And so they will be willing to have sex with a woman that they absolutely would not marry. They would not even introduce to their friends. And I think a lot of women don't necessarily know that. And so they will interpret sexual advances from men as flattering when actually they are potentially like cheap, you know.
This is the genesis of the alpha widow, right? Like, this is what many girls that are liberated sexually and using Tinder and stuff like that don't get. And I think that this is another. I'm actually not so convinced about quite how big of an effect this is. I'd need to see Rob go and do some research about it. But certainly, women are able to sleep with men that they wouldn't be able to get into a relationship with. But the reverse isn't true. And there is an argument that the aftershock of this means that those